Last week Susan spoke about Mark chapter 4 and she looked at it from the angle that inside the parable of the sower there is a message about rejection, and she talks about how there will be that one time that we'll feel the peace and the joy that we want. In the accounts of Jesus, we see Jesus traveling from place to place and healing the brokenhearted and spending time and hanging out with the people on the fringes of the society of that time. At the beginning of Mark chapter 5, we see Jesus traveling to a foreign country, and we see a man who used to inflict pain on himself and cut himself with stones, and it is said that this man was possessed by demons, and Jesus frees this man from his demon possession. It is said that day that 3,000 to 6,000 demons left this one person. Later on in Mark chapter 5, we see Jesus bringing back to life the daughter of a man that represented the same religious system that later on tortures and kills Jesus. Sandwiched in the middle of these two accounts, there is a story of a woman that always pulls on my heartstrings. Now, in Jewish culture, because of an Old Testament purity law, a woman was considered unclean as she went through her menstrual cycle. Anything she touched, a bed that she slept on, and any person that she was in contact with would also become unclean. Now, according to Facebook, most of you have attention span shorter than 5 minutes, so I won't get into the moral aspect of this, but from a hygiene perspective, this was a good thing. In a time where there was no Marks and Spencer's silk underwear or Boots walk-in or hot showers or even Dettol antibacterial wipes, this would have been a good thing from a hygiene perspective. But I can't tell you what it meant for one woman, a woman that suffered with bleeding for 12 years. I can only imagine the kind of pain that she was going through. Not just suffering physically, but also suffering by herself, on her own, isolated. Now, some of us can relate to that because of the last 2 years that we have had. We can relate to somebody suffering in isolation. Now, I can tell you that her society would have completely rejected her. If she was married before the problem started, by now she would have been single. It says in the Old Testament law that any man who has sex with somebody who is going through a menstrual cycle is also considered unclean. And in a time where baby making was still big business, this wouldn't have been good news for her. Her culture and her society was oppressed by a religious system that valued rules over people, that swapped compassion for others for approval of others. People would have avoided her on the streets. She would have certainly lived by herself, and maybe even her family would have rejected her. To justify their behaviour and excuse their lack of compassion, they would have made up lies and accusations about her. They would have said things like, she's like this because God is punishing her for being immoral. Or maybe they would have said, it's her family's sin, her mum's sin or her dad's sin, and God is punishing the rest of her family because of that. As the account develops, we find out that she had spent everything that she owned on doctors. And in first century Israel, I couldn't imagine that the experimental type of treatments they were doing would have been too good for her. I could imagine it being really painful and actually really bad and probably making the problem much, much worse. But it just shows a level of desperation that she just spent everything, all of her physical wealth, on being fixed and being healed. You see, most of us have a pretty good threshold for pain and suffering and physical ailment, but we have a really low threshold for being isolated and rejected and heartbroken. I could only imagine her inner turmoil going from being angry with God to repenting, then back being angry with God. I can imagine her not wanting to wake up in the morning, spending a lot of her time in bed, not looking after herself, struggling to make eye contact. As the account goes on, at some point she would have heard the rumours of Jesus, and when she found out that Jesus was coming to her town, I can just imagine her thought process. I can imagine her just thinking that this is her last hope. In fact, this might be her only hope. I can imagine it whisper in her mind, just saying to her that it worked for everybody else, but it's not going to work for you because you're too broken. Thinking to herself that she will be rejected by him too, but holding out that this is her last hope. It reads that she comes from behind Jesus, not able to look at his face or even dare to ask him, but she just hopes that maybe if she can just get close enough and touch his cloak, that she will be healed. And sure enough, the minute she touches Jesus' cloak, she is healed. But Jesus then starts saying, "Who touched me?" And I can just imagine in her mind, in her heart, just getting really scared that somebody was and Jesus was gonna say that you've defiled me, that you've made me unclean. Jesus keeps saying, "Who touched me?" She falls at his feet, fearing and trembling, maybe practicing what she's going to say to him, her apology, her repentance. Before she has a chance to speak, she hears a sweet word, "daughter." I wonder how many of you watching are waiting to be healed from your rejections. I wonder how many of you watching need to just hear son or daughter. I just want to encourage you wherever you are that God sees you.